Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're listening to this show. Welcome back to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, as always, Mahin the podcaster, and I'm joined by my good friend, Hassan Shibly. Hassan, salam alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Mahin. Great to be with you, brother.
You as well. So, for those of y'all who don't know, Hassan is an attorney, and he runs an organization called MuslimLegalFund.org.
No, not Muslim Legal Fund. So they do incredible work, but
Okay,
my law firm is actually Muslim Legal, website
Muslim.
muslim.org. And what we try to do is provide Islamic solutions
Mhm.
to the community's legal needs. So everything from Islamic arbitration to mediation, marriage, divorce, business contracts, estate planning, we do that. Alhamdulillah.
Sure. Right. And many people know you formerly as the proud former director of Care Florida. Alhamdulillah, they do a lot of great work. You still have a great relationship with them.
Incredible.
Right now, Hassan is taking time from his vacation in Costa Rica to record this close to 11 p.m. It's almost midnight in Chicago, almost 11 o'clock in Costa Rica, I think. Because of this recent trial that just went down with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, and I know you just recently posted something on your own Facebook, which got my attention. And I just literally messaged you. I want to say it was 2 days ago. I was like,
Right.
hey, I think this is something that's relevant. This issue of litigation of libel, slander, especially, and how your point of view as an attorney, and also the point of view that you had as someone who kind of experienced it himself. So that's the reason I kind of wanted to have this show with you. And just for the listeners out there, a lot of times people wonder what this channel's about. It's about understanding worldviews, why do people believe what they believe, but also part of that is to understand how the world is working right now, right? And why are things happening the way they are. So that's kind of what the this show's about. So Hassan, first of all, I know you've had a chance to maybe brief yourself on the Depp Heard case, but when you first heard about the verdict, what was the first thing I guess that crossed your mind?
Honestly, it was relief and hope
Okay.
because I think it sent a very powerful message that if individuals want to cry wolf and try to hijack the plight of countless victims of domestic violence, not because they themselves are actual victims, but because they themselves are actually the abuser. See, we have the proper venues for victims to get help, right? It's the court system, the legal system. There's many great community organizations that actually work on supporting, assisting, and holding abusers accountable. But a lot of times, abusers who may be extremely physically abusive, financially abusive, verbally abusive to their partners, when their partner moves on, and finds peace and finds happiness and finds tranquility, well, that enrages the abuser. So what does the abuser want to do? The abuser at that point then wants to destroy their life. And since they cannot do it directly with them anymore because they're no longer in the relationship, what they do is they go to the public, they go to the media, and they try to destroy their life that way by spreading false allegations against them, maybe even accusing them of abuse. And if that was the reality, and as an attorney, I've represented a lot of victims of domestic violence. Victims of domestic violence are often way too scared to speak out in the media because they know that just because the media is just making a show, if they're really afraid of somebody, they're going to want criminal legal help.
Right.
And I think we saw that in the Amber Heard case, where there were no 911 calls, there was no factual evidence. But when Johnny Depp was moving on with his life, when he was doing well, then she decided to write that op-ed to get attention, to hijack the plight of the countless actual victims of domestic violence, and really do them a tremendous injustice for her own personal gain.
Hmm.
And that's what sometimes people do. People do it for financial incentive. People do it for their ego. People just do it out of pure narcissism and out of hatred for their exes. And that's the worst thing you can do, because what you're doing is you're destroying an innocent life. And not just, I mean, in that case, it wasn't just Johnny Depp's life, but he's got children, right? He's
Right.
got parents. He may have siblings. He's got friends. He's got family. He's got people he works with, and they were all, attacked through that attack. But then every single actual victim of domestic violence is also was also done an injustice to, because unfortunately, let's acknowledge the reality is it does put into question um, the story of actual victims. When liars cry wolf, then I think people may second guess actual victims. So listen, no one benefits when people lie about this, and it was really enraging what Amber Heard did. And I think it personally, I was excited and happy to see that, you know what, there is hope out there. People will be held accountable. But we also have to have the caveat that, listen, Johnny Depp is a celebrity with millions of dollars at his disposal, right? He
Right.
has the resources to bring together this defamation lawsuit. And the reality is, most victims of slander, most victims of defamation, they don't have the financial resources to bring such a lawsuit, nor do they have the support systems to make it happen. Because when you're having a defamation lawsuit, I mean, it's extremely personally taxing, emotionally taxing, physically taxing, and definitely financially taxing. And there is a narrative out there. Well, and by the way, Allah is my witness. Over the last couple of years, so many women and men have reached out to me because they faced exactly what Johnny Depp is facing, both women and men.
Mm-hmm.
There's women scholars, women community leaders, women activists, and their husband isn't as well known. So when the marriage doesn't work out, he says, "Oh, I'm going to destroy you." And they literally have seen make fake Instagram accounts. They make and they start harassing and attacking. It's not about the gender. It really does come to be about somebody who's in the limelight, somebody who's in the service. And instead of honoring and thanking them for their community service, when the relationship goes bad, they're like, "Oh, well, you value your community service, so we're going to destroy you." And what people don't recognize too is we have this idea that people put community service out as a front. But when you look at our community servants, the virtue, all of them have a history of doing that since their childhood days, literally. People have been serving community since childhood. But when the relation doesn't want to work out, people want to weaponize that service against them and try to, and just exercise their form of abuse over them by trying to destroy their reputation when they can no longer harm them personally. So, in a nutshell, to your great question, in terms of the verdict, I think it does send a powerful message that we will not tolerate lies and slander and defamation by abusers to further harm their ex-partners by crying wolf. At the same time, though, we have to keep in mind that most victims of defamation and slander simply cannot afford to go through the process of a defamation lawsuit. So, and I've had people tell it to me myself. I mean, literally, I spoke to a respected sheikh, and I said, "Sheikh, what can I do?" Because after going through my own divorce, I said everything in my life is better, alhamdulillah. And there were times I wanted to take my own life. That's how difficult it can be when you're being defamed, when people are saying false things about you. And my hope and trust in Allah got me through. And alhamdulillah, now my life is better in every way. But at the time, it was very difficult. So I told him, I said, everything in my life is better except when people slander. That hurts, that hurts. And he said, "Listen, first of all, you're not better than the prophets, and they were all slandered. Allah himself does not stop people from slandering him. They say he has a son. They ascribe all sorts of false things to him, and he controls them and he allows them to continue. So if this is, within our tradition, who are you to have immunity from that?" But secondly, it's like, why don't you just sue them for defamation? And there's this conception that if people have wronged you, have hurt you, have lied against you, you can sue them for defamation. And again, it's really not a practical solution for most people because it's very cost prohibitive and expensive.
So let me ask you, since you're an attorney, would it be possible for you to run your own case pro bono?
There's a saying that the one who represents himself has a fool for a client. When the case is about you, you're too emotionally invested to think objectively. So my job as a lawyer for my clients is to understand that they are thinking emotionally and to bring them back into reality. So that's the first issue with that. The second issue is these things are extremely time consuming. And I will tell you this, man, I have never been busier than I have been over the last couple of years. I mean, alhamdulillah, I thought literally when I left my job at Care Florida and, when I was going through what I was going through, I'm like, okay, this is going to be my opportunity. I'm going to memorize Quran. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to read. I'm going to publish. But I haven't had time to do anything because literally every single day, people are calling me for help with their own needs and matters. And I'll be honest. I mean, I do feel as somebody who, alhamdulillah, has been dedicated to community service since my teenage years, I feel like it's very easy for us to fight for others.
Right.
But we don't. But by our very nature, we're passionate about fighting for others. But we don't have that same energy for ourselves. And I think that's where our hope comes in. That what, ultimately, even if we don't get justice in the court of law, there is the court of Allah, and that's what matters. And then finally, I mean, in my own situation, look, if the person who defamed you was a former family member, and especially when you have children together, at the end of the day, when you care about your children, you really just want peace.
Right.
So you're willing to forgive. Allah himself says your own spouses may be your enemies. but forgive. So you have to strive to that. So on one end, it may be individuals that no matter how much they've wronged you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best how much they've wronged, you just don't want to be entangled in chaos. You want peace. Your freedom is everything. Your peace of mind is everything. And that's the thing in terms of know who the abuser is. The abuser chases and wants to destroy, their victim.
Mhm.
Whereas the victim, they just want peace. They just want
Right.
to move on, and that's a critical issue to be aware of. So, and then secondly, in my own case, it was NPR. Now, in my case with NPR, I mean, they, alhamdulillah, everything they publish is completely against the court record, literally, completely against the facts. Not only was everything that they published false, but they knew it was false, and they were very unethical in what they did and how they went about it. And I can go in a lot of details about that. But at the end of the day, again, I'm one individual. And, do I really want to spend all the time, energy, and
Right.
resources suing?
That's an important point because with the Amber Heard Depp case, Heard is a celebrity ambassador for the ACLU, right?
Right.
And the ACLU, an organization that prides itself on defending the needs of the underrepresented minorities, Americans whose voice as being a voice for the voiceless, right? And then they essentially at this one side, and it's like, this is the problem. It's like, growing up, we used to always hear NPR was an objective news outlet and that kind of stuff, right? But it's like when you get sucked into this bandwagon, whatever it is, whether it's the Me Too movement, which maybe that's what, or this, when the spiritual abuse train, which you got, I think that train just picked you up on the way down, rolling down.
It's like a beard, bro. People literally told me if you just didn't have your beard and
It
you were
would
just
have,
a playboy lawyer, you
yeah,
would have been fine. But it's because you're Muslim and visibly Muslim, they tried to force you to fit in that narrative that they want
right.
to desperately portray and destroy.
And obviously it was convenient for people from the maybe like in some angles that you were the guy on Fox debating like Islamophobes, or the
Literally.
guy. I remember myself, my own experience with you was like, hey, I remember I was getting held up at the airport. I messaged you on Facebook. I'm like, hey, I need some, and you replied right away, like, hey, got you. This is what you got to do, etc., etc. We were good, right? Give me the counsel. So I can attest that you're not somebody who's just like on the screen, but like before that, I think we had met once at like ISNA. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like there is that that angle that some people who have vendettas outside our community want to see you taken down. And now
Oh,
and now you've got people who are in the community, so to speak, jumping on that bandwagon. And what's really unfortunate is you see like a lot of like when these cases start to happen, like certainly some of the cases that I've seen, when you look at it, you're like, man, that does look kind of shady. I'm not gonna lie. Some of the stuff that has gone down in our community, when you read like how people were groomed and etc., the details involved, I'm like, okay, there's not a lot of ambiguity here. It's very descriptive what went down. But
mm,
again, that doesn't mean that every case. And I think what happens is people have tendency to automatically assume every case is like the worst case.
right.
So
Right.
I
They
remember, yeah. So I remember when your ex-wife went out and they made that public, and it was, I think did she go through launch good or something? I think it
Bro,
was.
she didn't go. No, she couldn't have gone through launch because they actually have standards. But she
Okay.
went. She went to GoFundMe, man. two
Okay.
years after we were separated. But go
Right.
on.
I remember that was public, and then people, people, public figures in our community from the immediately, you don't even respond. It's like Hassan Shibly is trash, blah 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 blah. You know what I'm talking about, right? And I'm just like, yo, dude, like, and that's like, because that's when that's the problem with these movements where it's like hashtag believe all women, and like, and listen. I've heard their stories because CNN did an analysis of the Depp Heard case, right? I was listening to it the other day, and one of the legal analysts was saying that this is a setback for women, and at the end of the day, um, most women who actually only 5 to 10% are actually lying. Everything they're actually true, the minority, etc. But again, it seems to me like, yeah, that can be accurate, but I think people still need to like judge every case individually. I just don't see how like here's the thing. I feel like sometimes, and I've said this before, sometimes when news breaks, you don't have to have an opinion on it right away.
Thank you. Leave it to Allah. Leave it to those in power.
Right.
Leave it, you know,
And,
from the.
yeah. And sometimes you see people, and now it's funny is because you see some preachers who got accused of certain things, they're back on the circuit now, kind of, and we're like, okay, there's like nobody saying there's some people chirping about it, but it seems like they're back. It's just normal, like, some folks now, some would say, okay, this is just normalization of bad behavior. Others are like, well, at the end of the day, what he did necessarily wasn't really. It may have been like I wouldn't have done it. It may have not been the best for his marriage, but it wasn't how long. There's all these kind of things going on, and I think at the end of the day, it's like,
Well, if
are
we're going to
we
keep
really? I'm sorry.
I was just saying that if we're going to keep
Yeah.
slandering each and every person and
Right.
talk about each and every person's personal life, look, there is a clear line of abuse. For example,
Right.
a relationship with a client,
Right.
a relationship with an employee.
Mhm.
There's certain ethical norms that we all, have to abide by. But so there's coercion, there's relationships with those that you ethically cannot have a relationship with. And there's people's private life. And if we get into people's private life, I mean, I would tell you, the person who attacked me online, virtue signal calling charge, Allah is my witness. Woman approached me testifying that he did worse to them
Mhm.
than what he accused me of. And alhamdulillah, he accused me of was trash. But it's sickening. And we have to realize that what we're gonna do is, like, even in my own situation, alhamdulillah, the accusations were false. And I'm still doing what I'm doing. I mean, I'm traveling to Gambia in a few days for charity work. I'm
Right.
travel to Kenya. I'm doing work all over the US and all over the world, alhamdulillah. And for those who know that I'm innocent, alhamdulillah, they're happy. But for those who don't, then what they see is somebody who's had very bad accusations against him still living his life. And they think, oh my God, our community is horrible. Our community isn't horrible. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever said all people are bad is the
Yeah.
worst of them. Our
Right.
community is good. But again, when you falsely accuse people and then life continues, then you are normalizing all that bad stuff. So this is the problem. I think if we continue to gossip and talk about each and every person's private life, in the end of the day, look, the year's 2022,
Mhm.
June, it's LGBTQ Pride Month, right? We have
Right.
all Muslims that celebrate the LGBTQ lifestyle,
Mhm.
who, by the way, they're very big on this thing, polyamory, but they want to lynch Muslims. If homosexuals want to have multiple partners, and most homosexuals do have multiple partners,
Mhm.
you got Muslims celebrating and waving the gay pride. Yet they're
Right.
the same ones who will lynch Muslims who engage in polygamy or other things that are permissible within our Sharia. And in my case, it wasn't even about that. It was literally false allegations of serious allegations of domestic violence that, alhamdulillah, I remember the state of Florida and child investigator said, man, it's clear she's just jealous that you moved on and you're happy.
Mhm. Right.
Life, man, look, hide her.
There's something that I've had friends that have gone through divorces, and when I talk to them, it seems like it's a very painful process, right? Especially when there's kids involved, right? Because that's, I think, at the end of the day, one of the, because in general, the kids are gonna stay with the mother, so the dads are always like, that's what they're looking out for is what, and I think a lot of dads, I've talked to some people, they said, man, if I could have another man show up and try to raise my kids, man, I don't know how I would just lose it, right?
Mm.
Now, most of my friends who've gone through that didn't necessarily haven't had that situation because they, often their kids were older and whatnot. And it's funny because there seems to be an epidemic today too, where a lot of couples who have been married 15, 20 some years are starting to get divorced in our community. And I'm not sure why that is. It's something friends of mine have noticed. And I don't know, it's just a lot of, it's really puzzling, I think, in some ways. But I think just sometimes people just check out,
It-
and
Mhm.
do,
Well, I think
do,
go ahead.
it was a little tangent, but I was wondering if you had any insight on that, on why that's, if you've seen that trend, if that's something you've noticed, or is just maybe an anomaly, maybe I'm just seeing within my little bubble in Chicago.
Divorce is tremendously on the rise. And it's because when we don't live according to what Allah has revealed, we will be destroying ourselves. Shaitan's priority is to destroy families and to destroy households. Now, the problem that we have as Muslims in America is when we get married, we go get legally married,
Mhm.
okay,
Mhm.
without doing any of the prerequisites that we should be doing. So what happens is when we get legally married, we are subjecting our life, our marriage, our divorce according to these secular laws that frankly incentivize divorce within our household. So there's actually a financial incentive in
Mhm.
most cases for there to be a divorce. I mean, if you have a sort of a traditional Muslim household where the man is providing and the woman has been raising the kids and she's raised the kids for 5, 10, 15 years, then somebody tells her, yo, you're not living your life. Go live your life. You know, you may be fine, but you could be traveling the world. Oh, and your husband is a doctor, a lawyer. So you could literally file for divorce, get half of his money and travel the world, you know. And I've literally seen that happen on so many different occasions. So one of the things I advise women and men when they get married, if they want to preserve their marriage, have an Islamic prenuptial agreement
Hmm.
or an Islamic postnuptial agreement after you get married, which ensures that if there's a divorce, you do our Islamic arbitration, mediation, and that your divorce and marriage is governed by Sharia. And it should be designed in such a way where there is neither a financial incentive to divorce, nor is there a financial hindrance to divorce if there's a need for divorce. You know,
Right, right, right.
so, you know, mhm.
Yeah. So with that being said, I mean, when people are going through that, and then they're getting slandered a day or two after by, the ex-wife or the ex-husband. Um, is there something they can do during the divorce proceedings to protect themselves from future slander? Is there
There
something?
absolutely is. So the sooner that they can do mediation and get this thing before a judge, and that's one regret, I had. I mean, I tried for years to avert the divorce, tried to do what I could to keep the marriage together. We had 3 kids. I mean, I couldn't imagine not holding my daughter every single day,
Right.
and
And
that's
how old were your kids when that happened? When the was divorce finalized?
Oh, so I mean, there were about 8, 9, 10,
Okay.
or 7, 8, 9,
Yeah, still
uh,
relatively young.
very young, very young. And
Yeah.
what is in my situation, actually, my ex and I got separated back in 2019,
Hmm.
and she moved to Morocco. I was financially supporting her, and the kids were with me and my mother,
Mm.
and I literally would beg their mother, "Hey, come spend time with your children, please.
Yeah.
You don't have to see me. We're religiously divorced.
Yeah.
You don't have to see each other, but come spend time with your kids." But there is a very, in our modern extreme feminist ideology, it really promotes this live your life mentality, put yourself first, motivating you to choose yourself ideology.
Right.
And now I think both men and women, unfortunately, being taught to put themselves above the family units. You
Right.
know, we don't want people to be miserable and in unhappy relationships, but we do want people to put in effort to make the relationships happy, whether it is through therapy, through counseling, but putting in effort. And we live in a culture that's against putting in effort. We live in a culture of instant gratification. We live in a culture of swipe right, swipe left. So, man, you don't feel great in your marriage. Well, instead of putting in the effort to make it great, okay, move on to the next guy, move on to the next girl. And that's leading to the destruction of the family structure that's compounded by a legal system which incentivizes divorce. And I think the solution is we come back to our faith, we come back to our roots. We do, I mean, in my firm, we do Islamic prenuptial agreements, Islamic postnup agreements that inshallah help encourage the parties to work things out. Again, this is absent serious case of abuse. And when there is abuse, that is where
Yeah.
the system is, that's where the court system is, that's where the health professionals are. There's a whole support system, and there must be. But Allah help this community, because studies show that children of divorced households are much more likely to leave their faith, and to have problems with drugs, mental health, and a whole host of other issues. And we really need to start prioritizing our kids and the well-being of our children. May Allah protect this ummah.
I mean, and I think that sometimes I've talked to some, divorcees, and they're like, well, at the end of the day, I still see my kids. But I just think it's something that, we grew up, I remember growing up, the idea that, yeah, your mom and dad had fights, but mom and dad were still under the same roof. It wasn't like dad was living somewhere else and showing
Right,
up a few times a week.
right, right.
That's like a different dynamic. Even if your dad is like super busy and like
Mm,
away and stuff, at the end of the day, he's still like his stuff's there, everything. When he's gone and he just shows up like a guest, you know what I mean? It's like kind of how like my parents, they come to visit us, right? They come a few times a year from Ohio. They don't live there. They bring their stuff. They pack up. They hang out for 4 or 5 days, and then they leave. Right? But with a parent, it's much different. And I think that's where I think a lot of times, I've got to wonder how much people are thinking through that. But I think the advice people are getting to. So granted, I think sometimes you have to get divorced. I don't think there's any like there's abuse, right? But sometimes I'm hearing cases where people are getting divorced because they're just like not feeling it anymore. Um, it was funny because I was having I was at Ismail Royer's wedding maybe a few years back, and we was at a table with Dr. Shadi Al Masri, and Dr. Shadi was talking about like we actually were talking about divorces randomly, and he was a concept, and he's like, man, our parents wouldn't even think about it, but our generation, we're just too damn selfish.
That's it.
You know what I'm saying? And it's just like you'd rather just not work it out and you want to just be like, and sometimes the working out isn't like it's some I've seen people where it's just like, oh, someone just checked out, but I'm like, what does that mean? Like you like, did your husband or wife, like, they cheat on you? No. Were they abusive? No. I'm just not feeling them anymore. I don't like them anymore. You know what I mean? Now,
Literally.
you know what I'm saying? I'm just like, now sometimes is it because some one spouse got like really morbidly out of shape or something? I don't know. But a lot of times it's not the case. You just don't know. Just like sometimes people just like check out and for because they don't work on it. And it's this whole thing. I was talking to one of the show you here in Chicago about this not too long ago. He's like, yeah, because people come to him with the case, and it's like, honestly, it's just like people are not you know, and he was like, both guys and girls are not being taught how to be husbands and wives. We're
That's
taught about
it.
education. We're taught about you know, how you gonna go get that bread. You know, that's what you got to. It's like, because what do they always push you to get married, get that job, get that money, get married. But like, how to actually have a relationship, nobody's got a clue.
And if you're practicing, like if you're practicing, that's your first real relationship.
Right,
So, you may not have dated, you don't know. And so you make mistakes along the way. And without the proper support systems and training and therapy and counseling,
right.
I think divorce is it can become inevitable, unfortunately. And so what I do is people call me all the time that they want to file for divorce, whether it's a woman against her husband, a husband against his wife. And I tell people two things. The first is how, again, absent a necessity, absent safety issues, health issues, abuse issues, in the common situation where somebody wants divorce, the first thing I say is, do 1 month of therapy and counseling for every year you've been married. I mean, if you guys have been married for 10 years and you have 2, 3 kids together, before permanently separating, try to put in 10 months of therapy. See if you can revive and strengthen the relationship. That's the first thing. And don't take the easy way out and just quit it. And then you and your kids and all these people who feed and encourage people to divorce, they're not going to be there to take care of the kids down the road or to pay the bills or to help them when they're lonely. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing I say is remember that your spouse or former spouse to be, especially when you share kids, they're still the father or the mother of your children. So to the extent you hurt them, you're hurting your children. And to the extent you honor them, you're honoring your children. So have ihsan and excel in what you do and come to an amicable resolution. Look, let's be real. The American law
Mhm.
may give you more than you're entitled to. For example, if you're a husband and you have a lot of debt, you could theoretically pass on half your debt to your wife, but it's your debt. You are responsible for maintaining the marriage. You should not try to get rid of half of your debt through the divorce.
Right.
If you're a wife, you could be entitled to, and you weren't working, you could be entitled to a decade of alimony. Okay. But are you really, is that permissible within the Sharia? And are you going to fight over it? And so what I encourage the people is, listen, be forgiving. For the husband, if she's seeking A, B, and C, I mean, I had a brother calling me and he's like going crazy that his wife owes him like $40,000. I was like, brother, 40,000 in the grand scheme of things, just it's not that much. It's a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things,
Mhm.
just give it to her and move on, even if it isn't permissible for her. So you tell people, I always advise people when it comes to your rights, to the extent you can forgive
Right.
and never try to get more than what Sharia entitles to. If everybody does that mentality, we can have actually amicable divorces and that may lead to better situations of co-parenting because, raising teenagers in this age, even as a married household, is difficult enough. And now
Mhm.
trying to raise the children on your own is very difficult.
Right, right. You know, and I think that's where you know, people just are, that's the evident, because most times I'm seeing it's not really abuse, as far as I know. I mean, the accusations aren't coming out.
Yeah.
Now, going back to this whole like people, as I'm listening to the analysis of this trial, as you had mentioned, you were talking offline about, as a lawyer, to be able to win a slander or defamation case requires a very high threshold of evidence, right? With malice. And I heard it's even higher for a celebrity, because celebrities, people are going to talk smack about them already,
Right,
right?
right.
How, what kind of, does that, so an objective person would look at it and say that, well, the only way that happened is that Amber Heard's lies were so obvious and blatant, and they were unignorable. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I mean, no, no, it's absolutely clear. So if you're a public figure, look, first of all, in the United States, we have something called freedom of speech. So
Right.
generally, you have the protection to say whatever you want,
Right.
but there's limits to that, So one of those limits is if you defame and slander people, if you say things that are false. Now, if you say something that is false and damaging against a private individual,
Yep.
is one thing. But if your target is a community servant, an actor, a politician, a public individual, then the laws made it that it's that much harder to win because, as you said, you have to prove actual malice. So it's not enough that I have to prove that you said something false, but I have to prove that you knew it was false, you intentionally did it, and you were trying to cause me harm. And that's essentially what Johnny Depp's legal team did, and they were able to do that by proving time and time again how dishonest Amber Heard was, what her intentions were, what her motivation was, and quite frankly, the fabrication, and ultimately really showing how in reality she was the abuser. And that's a reality that I think a lot of people, haven't fully digested, is that yes, men can be victims of domestic violence, they can be victims of abuse, and there will be accountability when somebody who's very abusive ultimately tries to destroy the life of their former partner.
It's also interesting to see the different groups that have come out with different positions. It seems like, with a lot of things, it seems like certain groups tend to have certain positions, right? So even before the verdict, you started hearing stuff about like hashtag Me Too is just the end of it right now, right? So
Mm.
you've got, and that's coming from, and people say those are more right wing groups, and you know, but to me, it doesn't seem like this is an end of, like, it is in a sense that it does put into question the whole hashtag believe all women, I would say.
There's some people that are staunch supporters of that,
Yeah.
and I just find it sickening. There's no believe all women, there's no believe all men. Believe
Right.
facts. I mean, let's look at our tradition, the Quran,
Mhm.
right? Yusuf alayhi salam, a prophet of Allah, was falsely accused of rape by a woman.
Right.
He was falsely accused of rape. If there was hashtag believe all women, what would have happened to Yusuf alayhi salam? And he, even at that time, he went to jail.
Right. Right.
And he was a prophet of Allah. And this is a powerful story within the Quran. So the point is, in that story, her own family member said, look at the evidence. Where is the shirt ripped? Look, I understand and I completely respect that for far too long, women who have been victims of abuse have not been believed, have not been supported, and that is unacceptable. But there is ways to support people who are claiming to be victims of abuse without harming the people they accuse absent evidence. We have to balance both. We are a nation of laws, of due process. We're a faith of laws and justice and equity, right?
Right.
So I think our challenge is to provide support for those who are claiming to be victims of violence, and at the same time, not harm those that are accused absent evidence. And even that statement alone is enough to enrage a lot of people. There's
Right.
a lot who just want to be hashtag believe her. And you know what? It's all fine and dandy till what goes around comes around, and they themselves are eventually accused. And then
Yeah.
they see what it's like.
Well, the argument goes back to that most cases where women do accuse, they are legit, right? And I don't know how they get that data, by the way. I don't know where that. Do you know how that
And you
data
have
comes
to
from?
differentiate. You have to differentiate the data between accusation
Okay.
in the proper form versus accusation where you're on Instagram live laughing making fun of your ex and saying
Yeah.
how evil they were and how abusive they were from a
Right.
position of power that you yourself have, trying to destroy their life. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
it's very different when a woman is going and seeking help in the legals. And it's happened. There's been Black men that have been on death row,
Mm.
that have served decades in jail based on the false accusations of white women.
Right.
It's
Right.
happening within the US.
Well,
So,
Emmett Till.
yeah, I mean, a great example. So
Right.
we have to be careful. Let us just be balanced, you know. And look, I always admire, you know, I admire people that are passionate against domestic violence. I admire people that are passionate for women's rights, but we cannot lose the balance in how we do things. You know, we just, again, if an accusation is enough to destroy someone, then
Hmm.
everybody would be destroyed. Our religion is not, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ himself said, the proof is upon the accuser and the oath of innocence is upon the accused.
Yeah.
Again, we have to apply these within the modern context that respect the needs of those who are claiming abuse. But to destroy an individual's life and
Hmm.
his wife's life and his mother's life and his children's life just on an accusation, especially when more often than not, it can be possible, is if the person is innocent, that the evidence contradicts the accusation. People don't care about the evidence. I mean, in my own case, brother, can I tell you how many people that have slandered me online, and I've literally called them and say, hey, brother, message them. Hey, why
I
don't you,
remember I've seen you sometimes you post screenshots because you would just say, I'm trying to reach out to this person and they're not replying to me.
you know,
Right.
now they don't reply. I mean, yesterday it happened, man. Somebody was slandering me online. And really, wallahi, what I'm driven by is the hadith that like slanders of the worst of sins. You know what I'm saying? And I
Hmm.
don't want to go on the day of judgment and have a claim against a Muslim. You know, I don't want to be the reason a Muslim doesn't go to Jannah or gets placed in torment. So I don't want somebody slandering me, not just because it hurts my feelings and it hurts my wife, hurts my children, hurts my parents, but really because it hurts my Muslim brother and sister. So I was just like, listen, literally, I sent this to one of the ministers. I said, why don't you just, here's my cell phone number, call me, get to know me, spend a couple of weeks getting to know me, and then make your decision. And then if you want to slander me, go ahead, but at least do your due diligence. Literally, the guy said, I am not interested in speaking to you. I don't want to. So you want to talk about me, but you don't want to talk to me. This is the
Right.
problem. It's about this virtue signaling of, oh, look, I'm so righteous. I'm going to condemn every other person who's accused. But ultimately, we're promoting an environment where people's honor is not respected, where there is no justice. And that's completely antithetical to our faith and our values as Muslims and as Americans.
So wrapping up here, the thing of I and a lot of brothers and people I've talked to seem to be concerned about the trend with not only just lay Muslim celebrity types, but like people who are like involved in dawah in the community. There was a comment made about like, hey, I didn't really follow the Depp Heard trial, but this shouldn't be used as a reason to overlook all the abuse against women. There was just a murder down in Texas, for example, and things of that sort. Um, so when people what does it say? And I think a lot of times like these brothers like these duat they make these comments kind of not really I don't think it's ill-willed because some of these brothers I know personally and they're really good guys, but I just feel like they're living in some where we're so casual with making comments and then using things like because you first admit that hey I didn't follow this trial at all so I don't know nothing about it. Oh, and they were both kind of they're both kind of like scumbags, etc. So they're first of all it's kind of like equating them as the same, right? And therefore don't use it as an example. And secondly, it's what about this? This is like this is kind of the real issue, because they are concerned about this other issue of domestic violence, but then but then they misrepresent this case of Depp and Heard or whatever the springboard case is. And then what happens is that sometimes others will call them out on it. I'm like, hey, this you're showing a bias here that it might be a blind spot. And then there's a pushback back and forth where they're like, no, this is like you guys are being too aggressive, etc., etc. Um, you don't see our elders in the community get involved in this kind of rhetoric, right? I was talking about this with a friend a few weeks back with the whole like Shireen Abu Akla death. Everyone's commenting on social media, was she a Muslim? We pray, all that stuff. But you don't see like senior mashayikh necessarily in their communities. Like they would say things, but not really like
They're busy doing
yeah,
things.
it's subtle, right? But when he
Yeah.
talks about like when you talk about a lot of our du'at who are doing who a lot of their da'wahs off social media, right? Or they're doing like these they'll come in for a Friday night session for like 400 people at the local masjid, and they're great speakers, not necessarily scholars, but great speakers. But people treat them like authorities in the religion, and then they're kind of like essentially perpetuating a lot of the rhetoric. I almost say like not really understanding that they are. Does that make sense?
100%,
You know what I
100%.
mean? So how do we rectify that? As someone yourself, you mentioned you were at the ICNA convention a week ago, and people showed you love, like you know what I mean. And you're someone who I think has still connections to people in this capacity. I feel like we just need to have. I personally, in general, I'm not a fan of if some so and so makes a public statement. Yes, I think there's an argument to be made that you can correct them publicly, but oftentimes we don't know why they're doing it. Because sometimes virtue signal we jump to virtue signaling, but that's really that really might not be what's in their head. But some people are. Some people have a track
Exactly.
record of virtue signaling. It's like clear as a light of day. You know, that's what their shtick is. But sometimes you'll see people who normally don't comment and they'll make a comment on it, and I'm like, that's not necessarily virtue signaling. This is the blind spot for them that they need to maybe be educated on.
Until they experience, a lot of times we're shaped by our most recent experience. So, if somebody was just dealing with the actual situation of domestic violence,
Right.
then I could see how they take that position,
Right.
and there's,
Right.
it just depends on what you're facing. And a lot of times, look, if you're not married, you haven't been through a divorce, you haven't had a lot of these challenges that come with marriage, with raising children, with trying to sustain a marriage, with trying to deal with a divorce. If you haven't been in that, you don't know what it's like, and you
Right.
don't really understand what people are going through in those circumstances. So I think ultimately one rule we would all benefit from is we all need to learn to talk to each other about before we talk about each other. Let us learn to talk to each other before we talk about each other. We need to put that into practice, and that doesn't happen much in the online world. And I think the online world is very toxic, and it's not reflective of the real world. Again, online people will use all sorts of nasty language and speak in such harsh ways, but they don't have the guts to do that in the real world. In fact, they may be so nice in the real world. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But
Right.
also, online world isn't necessarily reflective of the real world. Of the real world, you often see a lot more love, a lot more compassion, a lot more respect. Online, it's just keyboard warriors. But I think to take it back a step, man, a lot of us have lost the love of brotherhood for each other. If somebody's done wrong, then before you want to slaughter them, advise them, engage with them, see if you can correct them. This cancel culture, it is satanic. The idea that you want to, based only on the accusation of wrongdoing, treat somebody as if they're an enemy.
Mm.
Again, if somebody's done something serious and it's proven and we know it, or the process is there, by all means, a'udhu billah. But as a general rule, we should speak with each other as though we are brothers. That doesn't preclude us from being just. That doesn't preclude us from holding others accountable. But we engage without celebrating, because there's people who you literally see them salivating at the chance to condemn someone, salivating at the chance to smear someone, to speak ill of them, and having a holier than thou approach. And that's not our faith, man. Our faith, I'll tell you, it is not a faith of gossip. It is not a faith, and people will justify it, and they'll find excuses. But ultimately, do we really love for each other what we love for ourselves? Because that is the lowest level of faith. The lowest level of it isn't that you're the best Muslim, or you're the sheikh, or you're the grand mufti, or you're
Right.
the waliullah, the great person. If you love for others what you love for yourself, it's the basic level of faith. And a lot of times we don't love for others what we love for ourselves. So, for example, if you make a mistake, how would you love to be advised? If you've done wrong, how would you love to be approached? And not only that, but a lot of times, again, it's misunderstanding, it's miscommunication,
Right.
complicated. We just need to learn to treat each other how we ourselves want to be treated. And ask yourself, if I was, somebody said I did this, how would I want to be approached? And then let there be a fair process. If the person is guilty, ultimately there are systems of accountability, and definitely not in this life and the next. And if the person is innocent, we have to be very careful before we destroy someone's honor online, because ultimately we will pay the price for that in the hereafter.
And it's a really good point you made about like recency bias, as far as if they were like the brother who I mentioned, he made the statement about the Depp, he kind of like generalized it and then springboarded something else. he's from the community where that murder happened like 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. It's
You know what I mean?
exactly.
So like that totally makes sense. That that's fresh in his mind. It's like a celebrity trial is like the last thing should it's not something he's like, okay,
He's
yeah,
just saw three women get killed in cold blood.
right.
So and that's where and I respect and support where he's coming from. In fact, so I completely disagreed with his post and I commented on it,
Yeah,
and I commented in a measured way just to speak out my personal experience. But
right,
then I called him and we spoke and we had a
right,
great conversation and we both learned from each other because
right.
that's what our faith is about: being humble, learning, engaging, speaking, and growing.
And I think that's the solution for us because I think a lot of times we want to we gripe about like our celebrity shuyuk mainstream imams not taking positions on certain things, right? Um, and we automatically jump to conclusions sometimes. Sometimes when you talk to them and it validates your concerns almost, but at the same time talk to them because at the same time it's like what are you gonna do?
What do you have to lose? What do you have to? I mean, I literally told the guys,
Yeah,
speak to me. What do you
yeah,
got to lose by talking to me?
right, right,
If your concerns are validated after we speak for a week, go ahead and lynch me publicly. But
right.
maybe you'll see you're mistaken.
And the thing of it is, sometimes what you'll notice is that like the celebrity mashayikh that you talk to them behind the scenes because they come through Chicago a lot. You have a chance to meet them. I've met many over the last 17 years or so in my various involvements in projects and whatnot. And when you talk to them, they're not sellouts. They don't believe what people paint them out to believe as like proponents of like Gomi loot, etc. Like this kind of like absurd slander that something's ridiculous, right? That's for a fact, right? But at the same time, they explain to you, hey, this is the kind of community I deal with, right? This
Mm,
is what is going on. I am completely against this, right? But at the end of the day, you can't like the people the way the messaging is, some people gravitate towards that like hardline language. You have when you take a shake in like tasawwuf and spiritual guidance, there's
mm.
different types. There's that kind of shake that like lets everyone in the door, and you wonder like that shakes a big time scholar. Why is like so and so like how come he's got all these like for example female murids who don't wear hijab and stuff, right? And you've come to understand sometimes you don't like it. Like don't get me wrong, sometimes I'm like it still annoys me, but I get where he's coming from because he's trying to meet people at their level, and he's just trying to like because sometimes he's like maybe they're not even like they got one foot out the faith, but this idea of tasawwuf or Sufism, whatever necessarily spirituality appeals to them. So I'll work with them at their level and I'll give them the time. And obviously, some of these scholars are in their 70s. They know they're double my age. I'm not gonna like question, as far as like, but I'm like, I see what but it's also a part of me. Like sometimes I feel like we want to like in our youthful zeal, and even though I'm 40, I still have that that blood
Well,
of like trying to like say like, man, we gotta put it down for the huck, right? You know what I mean? But sometimes like, man, people in America are like, you gotta understand like. Most Muslims aren't even praying, dude. Like, just be real.
the
Like,
issue,
let alone like we're gonna start like hammering somebody because they, according to us, have improper akida, which is
right?
important. Don't get me wrong, that's important. That's really important. But I'm saying that like that you can't. There's certain people. If you start talking to them about that, they'll be like, "What are you talking about, bro?" Like, you know what I'm saying? So I think that there has to be, and that's what these shuyuk deal with. They are dealing with people at a mass level. So we shouldn't like conflate the fact that they are mainstream in the sense that like, and sometimes the community puts them there, and they're young and they're making mistakes,
Right,
and
right.
you have to work with them. The brother that we were discussing is an old friend of mine, man. We came up together, right? So
Mm.
that's why I'm saying there's definitely no ill intent there. And if like, and I tried to the brothers who coming after who were trying to come at him, I'm like, listen, bro, he's a good, he's like you might not agree with him on some points of theology or finer points here and there, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think that's where he's coming from. Like he's not like for example like sold out to the gynocentric world order, as some people want to say. I'm like, he doesn't even know, but like, it's like this is what you guys are thinking about something. He's not even thinking about that. He's just thinking about, like you said, this murders happened in Texas, and we gotta like that's my concern. And this Depp heard, I didn't really follow it, but but that's again, it's kind of life we live. The world we're living in. You got to comment. You got to put out a tweet. You got to get a take out there, right? Because it's all for marketing.
And we have to
And
question whether we do, man. I mean, the Prophet said, whoever is quiet is safe. Like you
yeah,
said
right,
earlier, we don't
right,
have to come on each and everything. I mean, because otherwise we're taking a gamble.
yeah, right.
Gamble. So when you want to write,
Yeah.
so and so is an abuser, but you yourself haven't witnessed it, you haven't seen the evidence,
Mhm.
effectively against, and you comment, okay, if you're right, you're safe, and maybe you're even doing a good deed because you're warning about a danger.
So even if Johnny Depp's a non-Muslim, you wouldn't want to, because it's a lot of people justify it that way. They'll be like, "Well, he's a kafir anyway, so it doesn't matter."
And what were all the Sahaba before they became Muslim?
Kufar.
What was Omar
Mm,
before he became Muslim? Did he
right,
not bow down to idols?
right.
Why do we have such hatred for the creation of Allah? Man, we should want guidance for all of them, even Amber Heard, all of them. We should be, we're not driven by love anymore, Akhi. We're driven by arrogance. We want excuses to tear others down. A pious Muslim, you're not even going to be tearing down non-Muslims, to be honest, because you want to call them to the deen. And
Right.
you realize if you're talking to them with hate, then you're not going to be able to invite them. But there is a problem within the modern world of this arrogance, and that's we treat each other with this arrogance. Again, we celebrate the opportunity to tear somebody down, to gossip, and we just relish it. I mean, there was this one organization, and their job is to like expose community leaders that and have accusations of bad doing. But I went on their Instagram page, and you literally see the smiles on their faces when they're about to talk about somebody and all the bad things he did.
Right.
It's like we relish it. Man, your heart should be broken if you're talking about that. And if it's true, then we should be in tears.
Mm,
It's nothing to celebrate.
right.
So my very brief and wallahi heartfelt message to everybody is just like, let's just treat each other as innamal mu'minuna ikhwa. We're all brothers. Help your brother or sister, whether they're the oppressor or oppressed. If they're the oppressed, help them. But if they're the oppressor, you help them by stopping them from their oppression. And if we knew hellfire, we wouldn't want anybody to be in hellfire, man. I mean, our religion taught that the man who killed 99 people was forgiven. So if you see somebody doing wrong, don't try to help the shaitan against them and reinforce that they're bad. Find way. If they're in an active state of injustice, yes, we have to stop the injustice. But if there's no active state of injustice, okay, then try to guide them, to teach them, to mentor them. This idea of just writing everybody off and judging them by their worst action, or not even their worst action, their worst alleged action, and writing everything off, it's satanic because it wants to cancel all goodness from the community. I want to share, I know we've gone for some time. I want to share a very, very, heart touching story of one of the companions. When Rasulullah was sending an army to invade Mecca, this companion sent a letter to warn the Quraysh. Essentially, this companion committed treason. What worse can there be than treason? Warning the polytheists that the messenger of Allah is coming,
Hmm.
right? And he sent this letter with a woman. The Prophet ﷺ sent the Sahaba to capture that woman. He received the revelation. They intercepted the letter. Then they brought that Sahabi forward. And Umar was like, yo, let me just cut off the head of this hypocrite. This guy just sold us out. He almost ruined our plans, our invasion. But the Prophet ﷺ, first of all, he allowed him to speak. He allowed him to explain himself. We don't give opportunity for each other to listen.
Hmm.
SubhanAllah, even in the Quran, there's stories where, Allah asks Musa, what's in your hand? Allah knows that Moses alayhi salam is holding a staff, but he's teaching us the adab of asking, of giving people opportunity to be heard. So anyway, the companion answered that, listen, I know Allah's going to give you victory, but I have weak family members and I was worried for their safety. And I hope by sending this letter, you'll still be victorious and my family will be safe. So Umar, again, he was not tolerating. He's like, let me cut off his head. And the Prophet said, listen, you don't know, this is a man of Badr. You don't know what if Allah looked at him and said, do what you want, you're forgiven.
Mm.
Forgave him. So here this man actually did a tremendous act of injustice. The Prophet did not cancel him in that circumstance. And again, I don't want people to misconstrue this. He supports people who did bad things. And no, we're against evil actions. We're against abuse. Yes, I've falsely been accused, and alhamdulillah, the court vindicated me. The courts cleared my name. The state of Florida cleared my name. The evidence cleared my name. So I'm not speaking as somebody who's done something bad and wants a second chance. No, man, I was falsely accused, and the people who did that will have to answer to Allah. But
Mm.
still, this idea of just wanting to judge people by the worst allegations against them, and just promoting that everyone is indecent, everyone is bad, it's very toxic, and it's reinforces negativity. And I think we just need to start talking about the good within our community. Our community is good. There's tremendous good. There's tremendous women and men that are serving their communities selflessly and at great sacrifice. And we need to reinforce that and support that. Don't amplify the evil. So Shaitan celebrates it and inspires others to copycat it. We talk about this with the mass shootings. You know how many mass shootings we've had since Texas? Like at least a dozen already. You know, copycatism is real. And the more you talk about the evil, the more there's copycats of it. No, let's talk about the good and inspire copycats of good. Don't normalize evil by spreading each and every allegation without proof, without evidence. The Prophet said, it's enough for a man to be considered a liar that he passes on everything he hears. So, it's a blessing to be Muslim, and Islam is a religion of mercy and love and compassion. We got to love each other, man. We got to have true love for each other and wish goodness for each other, and talk to each other before we talk about each other.
MashaAllah, very well said, and it's a great way to close this out. If someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
So my Instagram is Hassan ESQ underscore HASSAN ESQ underscore. They can also visit my website and reach out to muslimlegal.org. Especially if they need assistance with Muslim legal issues. Really, my hope is that we all solve our conflicts according to the teachings of Allah and His Messenger, and that's what we try to do here at Muslim Legal. So muslimlegal.org.
All right, and for my listeners, if you have any questions or comments, you can hit me up at info@sultanansneakers.com. If you have any guest recommendations, anyone that you think I should speak to, let me know. Also, hit me up on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, not on TikTok. I got to get back on TikTok. That's the way to get clips going again.
We're too old for that, bro. We're too old for that.
No, but like TikTok, in like 5 years, it'll be like Facebook. So like Literally. That's what they said that about Facebook. Facebook was supposed to be for college kids, Ivy League college kids originally, right?
But it came out when we were in college, and look at it. I mean, I got 4 kids now, mashallah.
Right. So it definitely I want to definitely appreciate brother Hassan for coming on his vacation and talk about his very important subject. And hopefully we can do this for a Mad Mamluk show in the future. When we come to Chicago, we can get you in studio and get you some deep dish pizza or something, right?
Oh, so, I'd love to, man. Habibi, thank
you. For sure. So for our special guest Hassan Shibly, I'm your host Mahin the podcaster, signing off.